Hi, my name is Rachel Schultz. I'm going to start with home because I do everything at my house with the exception of I have a cleaning crew come in twice a month to kind of take care of the big things. So family management and home care is a really big part of my everyday life. And I also have a company called Manage Motherhood where I work with women to help them organize and better manage their busy lives. And so kind of keeping my hands in that for myself, it has been an effective way for me to bring practical tips to different women. I've been with my husband since I was 16, so
you win.
Gosh, I don't know, 22 or 23 years, that kind of dates me. And I have 2 children. My son's about to turn 10, and my daughter just turned 7. And community involvement for me, because I have so many hands in different things, really involves me actively engaging with the members of my neighborhood. We have a very active community in our neighborhood and a lot of social events, and I do a lot of volunteering at my children's school, and which I love. Just gives me an opportunity to get my 7 minutes in with them every week or so. And so I feel really balanced with my life. Yeah, and I do a lot of personal care. That's a big core part of, I really believe that you can only give what you have, and I believe that giving from a place of abundance feels totally different than the energy that you give when you're depleted. And so one of my core principles is to really take good care of myself, and so I carve out a lot of time. Not a lot, enough to get that done. A reasonable amount.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's start with, thank you so much for each sharing your mixes. I think you can see we've got a pretty good variety, maybe a little light on the home care section, so maybe some Q&A on that, because I'd like to lighten the home section too.
So our next question is for Rachel, and unlike Jessica, you had a rather, as you would call it, a very crooked career path, from studying business in school to then a successful pastry chef to a stay-at-home mom, and then running your business now is kind of a successful stay-at-home blending from also a restaurant stint owner. Would you share with us some of that and what motivated each of those changes?
Sure. So Lauren's word detour kind of epitomizes that crooked path. Yeah, and I think that for me, it was motherhood. You know, motherhood was kind of the trigger for me that launched something that didn't make sense for me anymore. So I started my career as a pastry chef. I had every intention of having a bakery cafe, using my business degree, and launching into something. But the reality for me was that motherhood was in direct conflict with the requirements of being a pastry chef. So I wish I could say that all of my detours were kind of brilliant strategic planning at work. But what ended up happening for me is that when I became a mom, we were just in a natural transitional period in our family. My husband had graduated from grad school and we were moving back to Colorado from Boston, and so staying home full time just made a lot of sense for me while we made that transition. And I didn't have a designated period of time that I was going to stay home. I just decided that when it felt right, I would go back to work. And what I discovered was that going back to work didn't make a lot of sense for me. That field is not necessarily high paying. And so having a nanny did not make economic sense. That wasn't viable for us. And my husband traveled extensively at the time internationally, and we didn't have any family in town in Colorado anymore. My parents bailed as soon as my sister graduated from high school, so we didn't have anybody anymore. And so that traditional daycare schedule didn't work for me either. So when I had the opportunity to become a partner in a restaurant, I jumped at it because it was my opportunity to relaunch my career. And I thought that it would give me an opportunity to also kind of control my schedule. And at the time, my son was 3.5 and my daughter was 5 months old. What I discovered was that I had a 20-hour day every single day of the week between balancing my work life and my home life, with the exception of Tuesday and Wednesday, where I pulled an all-nighter every single week for 7.5 months. I had a 39-hour day. And it wasn't sustainable. And so when I left the restaurant, I decided to leave the food industry completely. And that was when I was kind of detour run amok. You know, I took a stab very intensively in children's book writing, and I explored some other options. But when I finally sat down and asked myself, you know, where have I spent 10,000 hours? You know, if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, there's the whole kind of 10,000 hours to become an expert. I thought, where have I logged 10,000 hours in anything in my life over the last 6 years, such that I could be considered an expert in that field and make this transition? The answer was so obvious. I'd struggled to be a mom, you know, and live my life and have it organized and make sense for me in the context of motherhood. And so when I made that decision to create my company, Manage Motherhood, and to help other women do what I had done, which is really figure out strategies and systems that work to feel whole in their life and also kind of manage all of the different roles that we fulfill. I got a lot of clarity, which was wonderful for me because I spent many, many years in that transitional period having trouble redefining who I was beyond being a chef. And I think it's important to be transparent about that because you can look at a crooked path and think it looks really glamorous and sexy, but the reality is that I was lost for many, many years. And so I feel very, you know, privileged to be able to do the work that I'm doing now. And so to ask the question of being, you know, what's the motivator was, the trigger was becoming a mom, but the motivator was that I realized I needed to evolve. And to use Brenda's words, the formula no longer worked for me. And so just creating a sustainable whole life has been what's led me to the path that I'm on now.
We're going to go back to Rachel. We're going to get a flip side of the story. Everyone else seems pretty overscheduled and overdoing, but you actually pride yourself on not overdoing to make sure you have quality time with your husband and your children at the end of the day. Can you share a little bit about that not overdoing and how you see that in a couple quick steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can all relate to that feeling of being depleted. And depletion is really a byproduct of overdoing. And so I made a personal commitment to myself after leaving the restaurant because I really pushed myself kind of to the edge that I would never do that to myself again. And what that means for me is that I have parameters around my life that I've put into place and that I follow those guidelines. And so, for example, I only work when my kids are in school. I don't know about your calendar for school, but they're out of school a lot, right? I mean, like another 3-day week? This is awesome. My ballet girl coming out from when I grew up in California there. So, you know, for me, I just put very firm kind of definitions around my life. So when I pick my children up at 3:30, I am done with work. I don't answer my phone after 3:30. It goes to voicemail. If it's important, I can get back to them really quickly, but usually, again, because it's not rocket science or anybody's life is in danger, it can wait until the next day. And I don't check email again until my kids are in bed. And those are the commitments that I made to my children. I told them that they could give me a consequence if I answered the phone after 3:30, and they love giving me consequences for that. So the other thing is that I really want to engage with my husband at the end of our day. It's really the only chance that we have to connect. And so for me, it's about managing my energy level and my output, you know, while I'm going through my day. And so that means that I get a good night's sleep, I exercise regularly, and I work really hard to actually feed myself. I know that's hard for us to just even get a decent meal in or, you know, to nourish ourselves. So for me, like managing my blood sugar levels is really helpful so that 8 o'clock I'm not in a vegetative state, wanting to just kind of slink down on the couch or, you know, just kind of go onto the computer and veg out there. The other thing is we actually don't overschedule our weekends. And what that means for us is we selectively opt out of a lot of things. It gives us a chance as a family to reconnect and to regroup. And for us on Monday, we've used the weekend as an opportunity to kind of press the refresh button so that we're not always kind of hitting the ground running. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. And so I've grown more accustomed to being uncomfortable or comfortable with being uncomfortable, if that makes any sense, right? Because I know I can't necessarily get it all done because the consequence to me is overdoing it and depletion. And so, you know, I love the fact that you guys talk about this as a mix. I think a lot of times it's about balance. You know, the discussion is about balance, but I really have found that it's about boundaries. And so having clearly defined boundaries and specifics on those things and how I want to live has been the main way that I prevent overdoing.
Thank you. I'm sure we can all benefit from that.
Absolutely.
So we have so many different mixes and so many ways to thrive, and challenges along with it, right? We're not mistaking thriving with perfection. But we want to give you all a chance to ask a few questions. So Lisa Hidalgo's got a microphone, and if you raise your hand, she'll come to you and we'll take a couple. So don't be shy, because she's not.
Oh, I've got one. Don't be scared. I was worried that I was going to have to ask a question. I'm coming. Give me a sec. Hey, by the way, by a show of hands, don't lie. How many of you women have snuck into the bathroom with a glass of wine and locked the door just to get a few minutes away? I did it last night, but it's a good way to reset. I challenge you to try that. Where was it? Here we go.
So my question is really for all of you. What triggers are in place for you to know when you're veering off course? Because we get going in our daily lives, and sometimes we don't even realize how far off course we've gotten until it's too late.
I think this would be a great one for either Catherine or Rachel to take.
Impatience, for me, is my trigger, or my marker. So when I start feeling short with my kids and my tone of voice changes, when I'm a little, sharp with my husband, when I notice some internal negative chatter, that's how I know I've tipped the scales. And that's a choice. It's a part of being aware. There has to be an awareness, because from that space is the only space that you can really make a transition, because you have to become aware of what's going on in order to consciously to make a switch. And so for me, like kind of my tone, that hurt. Let's go, guys. We got to hurry. We got to get in the car. It's time to go. Forget going number 2 seconds before we've got to be in the car. Why can't we regulate this earlier? I can't get that way. And that's the reality of my life, right? I mean, so that's the biggest piece for me, I would say, and feeling frustrated.
My question is for Rachel. You talked about self-care, that you take care of yourself. And that's such a hard thing for women to make time to do. So do you insist upon it? Are you vocal about it? Or do you sneak it and hide it and sort of manage it in the dark shadows?
So do I sneak it and hide it from my family, or absolutely not? No. I use it as a way to model. Because I don't think that my children are going to have the expectation of that for themselves if they don't see me doing that. And I also remind them that when I'm stronger and happy, that I am able to give to them better. So, I do try to do as much as I can on my own. I think the problem is that sometimes we have the perception that it's selfish and that we don't have the luxury of spending time on ourselves, but it's kind of like running a bank account in a deficit. And I feel like it's, no one would use that. We take that same logic and we apply it to our lives. Right? So why would we would never run a bank account in deficit, and yet we run our lives in deficit all the time. And so I have some practices that I do in the morning, just a little 10 minutes before everyone else gets up, that gives me a chance to center myself. And then I just sprinkle it really throughout my day. And this is where I have kind of created a lot of that in my business too, is to teach other women how to do that in a way that's sustainable and makes a lot of sense for them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure we could keep asking these questions on, and everybody will be around for the rest of the day, so if you want to catch anybody and ask questions, please do. And I just want to really thank each of you, Jessica and Brooke and Catherine and Rachel, for both opening up and sharing your triumphs as well as your challenges, and just helping us see that there are so many different choices that we can each make, and different paths and different stages, but you have found different ways to thrive within that. And we always say that meaningful work, meaningful family life, and meaningful life outside of all that does not have to be an either-or proposition. So thank you for helping us see that today. Thanks, everybody.